Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's artist talk with Treasa O'Brien. My name is Chris Clark. I'm a senior curator here at the Glucksman and very pleased to welcome Treasa. This is part of our ongoing series of online artist talks accompanying our current exhibition, Home, Being and Belonging in Contemporary Ireland. And it's a chance for us to invite participating artists to discuss their practices as well as their work in the exhibition. And these talks will take place throughout the duration of Home, running all the way up to October 31st of this year. Treasa O'Brien is an artist, filmmaker, writer, and educator. She's made several experimental moving image works, exploring the themes of home and belonging, working as a solo author and in collaboration with others. She studied sculpture in LSAD, and then fiction film directing in Goldsmiths, and later did a PhD on experimental documentary practice, exploring documentary as a performative act. Her work has been shown in film festivals, cinemas, galleries, and alternative social spaces internationally. Her work has been awarded funding by Screen Ireland, the Arts Council of Ireland, Clare County Council, and the Goethe Institute. And films and art projects have been shown internationally in festivals and galleries and bought for broadcast. And she's worked on productions for Channel 4, BBC 4, and the United Nations. So for those of you who are familiar with the format, I'm going to hand over to Treasa here now. Hi. And she's going to talk for approximately about half an hour or so, and then we'll recommence for a moderated discussion and any questions you might have as well. So you can use the chat or Q&A function to pose any questions. Without further ado, welcome Treasa, and I'm happy to hand over to you.
Hi everybody. I don't know who's here, so I can't see you, but I imagine you're all fab. So thanks for joining us this afternoon. So yeah, I'm just going to, it's a short lunchtime talk, so I'm not going to go through everything I've ever done. But I'm going to just highlight a few things that are sort of, I suppose, most current, and especially things pertaining to the exhibition Home and Belonging, work I have in the show, work I've done during lockdown, and work that's kind of connected to the themes that are in the exhibition. So I'm going to start off with there, while you were waiting, I was showing Town of Strangers, which is a feature film that's connected to the Blow-In that's showing in the Glucksman at the moment. And so, yeah, maybe I start off talking about how those two projects, the Blow-In, the short kind of installation that's showing in the Glucksman, and the feature kind of hybrid documentary that's on, you can rent at the moment from the IFI, how they are connected. So, well, the first connection is they're both made in Gort, in the west of Ireland, in Galway, or Gorty Wood. There's been quite a few films made there over the last number of years now. So Gort is like a small town at the edge of the Burren, on the border between Galway and Clare. It's in County Galway. And I started going there originally. I was attracted to the place for two reasons, or three reasons really. I was living in London at the time, and I was coming back to Ireland over the years and seeing a very changing Ireland, an Ireland where instead of people having to immigrate from it, lots of people were immigrating into Ireland. And I was really interested in this new Ireland, where Irish people had opportunities to stay, and people from other places were coming to live here, and how that was changing our society, and what that meant. And meanwhile, concurrently with this, I was doing a lot of work working with migrants, people seeking refuge, and undocumented people in London, Calais, and mainly in Greece. And I was, I suppose, connecting what I was seeing here, living in a big multicultural place like London. The word multicultural has lost meaning in many ways, but understanding a lot of that as through England's history of colonialism, and then Ireland's sort of dual identity somehow as like sort of a privileged Western nation, and yet also a post-colonial nation, and I'm just very, very interested in how this plays out in our culture and in our kind of society, in our relationships to ourselves, in our society, and from our society, if you like, as well. And so I started researching. I chose Gort because it was the town at the time that was worst hit by austerity, and it was the town that had the most different nationalities in it at the time, including a very large number of Brazilians who live in Gort. And I was also writing a fiction script and that was based around a meat factory. And there was a lot of meat factories in Gort where people had come to. It's why a lot of the Brazilians had originally come to live in Gort. And I knew I was starting a PhD at the time as well, and there was always research for this PhD, and I was quite interested in ideas of Jean Rouch, ideas around ethno-fiction, working with what some people call non-actors, or you can call first-time actors, or participant subjects, but I guess working with people to perform themselves in some way, whether this be fiction or documentary. I mean, I use fiction and documentary because you know we have labels because they help us to understand things and they're shorthand. But you know, as well as that, I in my work I'm trying to develop a sort of a language that's non-binary, I guess, around fiction or documentary, but that's somehow transcending that. And I ain't the first person to do that. I'd be very influenced by a lot of Iranian filmmakers like Kiarostami and others, Mohsen Makhmalbaf. Actually, that year I came to Cork, he was special guest of the Galway Film Fleadh, and I did a workshop with him, and that was very influential on me as well. And his film, Salam Cinema, which is basically a whole film just using auditions, was something that I was very interested in. And so I called for auditions in the town of Gort, and this led eventually to the making of Town of Strangers. But I didn't know what Town of Strangers, I mean, I'll talk a little bit more about Town of Strangers in a minute, but because that became like a 3-year project. But meanwhile, while I was researching towards this film and these ideas that I had, but I wasn't quite sure what form it would take yet, I was approached by the Goethe Institute and asked if I would make a short film in Ireland and team up with somebody from Spain. And so they were doing this whole thing called Europoly, where they had like 10 directors working with different people all across Europe. So they were just matching, you know, this big kind of inter-country thing. But they came and the funding was there and it was a very open brief. And I was already researching and they wanted me to do something maybe around housing. They'd seen Eat Your Children, a film I made about post-austerity in Ireland. Or austerity, sorry, the austerity measures and the bank bailout. And I kind of basically used that funding to make The Blow-In, which is what's on show in the Glucksman at the moment. And it helped me to test out some of the ideas that I later have in the feature Town of Strangers. And so I call it an ethno-fiction. And this is kind of a term that's coming from anthropologists, where you would write up you do ethnographic research, which I was doing in Gort. I lived there for 4 months. I rented rooms from different people there, including people from Brazil who had moved there to try and get to know the different communities living there. And I was writing diaries and hanging out in the charity shops and getting to know people. And so I cast The Blow-In from that kind of research period and worked with Catalan cinematographer Gina Ferrer, who came over to make it with me. So I think I'll just show you maybe the first 3 minutes of The Blow-In, and you can go along to the Glucksman if you want to see the whole thing. So just give me a moment to share my screen here.
Voilà, ça fait 6 ans maintenant que j'habite à Gort. Et je me sens toujours pas chez moi ici, mais bon, c'est l'histoire de ma vie. Je me suis jamais sentie chez moi nulle part. Même surtout quand j'étais petite d'ailleurs, parce que j'ai passé les 2 premières années de ma vie avec mes grands-parents et quand je suis retournée vivre avec ma famille, j'avais pas du tout l'impression que ces gens étaient ma famille. Et je me rappelle aussi que quand j'étais petite, je passais beaucoup de temps à regarder par la fenêtre des gens pour voir comment c'était chez eux, pour voir comment c'était une vraie maison, un vrai foyer, une vraie famille. Et puis j'imaginais que c'était ma maison.
Não fique tão triste porque você não pôde sair na rua hoje, tá bom? A gente ama o Gort, não é? Você ama passear pelo Gort, não ama? Mas a mamãe sente muita falta do Brasil. Você tem que conhecer o Brasil. A gente só não foi ainda porque a mamãe não tem a documentação para poder sair da Irlanda e entrar novamente, querido. Quando a mamãe arrumar a documentação, a gente pode ir e voltar para nossa casa. A gente tem 2 casas, uma aqui e uma lá no Brasil. Uma casa em Gort e uma casa no Brasil. Uma casa em Gort e uma no Brasil. Você quer ir passear, visitar a vovó e o vovô? Quer? E você vai sentir saudade da Minnie? Vai sentir saudade de Gort? Das ruas de Gort? Das aventuras em Gort? Hein? Você nasceu em Gort, a mamãe nasceu em São Paulo. Bem grande. Bem grandona São Paulo é. Gort é bem pequenininha, bem charmosa. São Paulo é grande e horrorosa. É, mamãe. É, mamãe.
Så hur går Blåens vän i Thamshin?
Asha, Blåens Moimar, Blåens Tuktaradram nach Rugusanatiga Sahulins, Sanawi.
So what you see there is, so Veronique, begins on this tree, and she starts to tell a story about when she was a child and how she used to look into people's windows and her sense of displacement and how she feels that her sense of displacement now as an adult is relating back to this time as a child. So I had met Veronique in my hanging out, which is an ethnographic method, hanging out in charity shops in Gort. And I found her very interesting because she was very straight up, kind of going, I don't like living in Gort and I don't really want to be here. And this led to much deeper conversations. And she told me this story of her childhood and so on. And so I asked her basically if she would like to sort of enact out this piece. So what you see is this kind of ruse, if you like, of Veronique telling her story, and then she goes around and looks in people's windows. And so none of this is scripted, but I am directing. So I'm asking them, tell me that story, and I might prompt and say, tell me again about that part. I'm really interested in that part or something. And so then we go, so Veronique goes around to all these houses. So we see her kind of peering into these windows, as you saw in the first piece, where she peers into Anna's window and Anna's chatting to her dog. So I was renting a room from Anna, and that's how I got to know her. And I asked her if she would be part of this film and to talk to her. We were actually, that was a little bit of a one of those wonderful accidents that happens. We had, her boyfriend was supposed to come and we were going to have her chatting to him about it, but he couldn't show up at the time of our shoot. And so we had her chat to her dog, but I think it worked wonderfully. And because, I did live with Anna, and that was very true. She did talk to her dog, and she was quite lonely in Gort. And she's much more settled there now, and married the boyfriend, and dog is still going as well. But and so her piece is not scripted either. And in fact, because I don't speak Portuguese, because I have some very pidgin Portuguese, I have Spanish and I can understand a bit. I didn't always understand, but I asked people to just speak in the language that they felt most comfortable with, and I was quite interested in that as well, of this, showing through language a different way of speaking or a different way of communicating, and honoring the languages that people have, because I'm quite critical of this idea around kind of assimilation and tolerance. It's more about I guess kind of welcoming and encouraging or accepting or acknowledging, I suppose, people's cultures where they're from. And I guess as Irish people, so much of our kind of culture that we have here is from our immigrant culture. Songs of kind of longing and so on are such a big part of our culture. And I guess I really want to kind of honor those in people who are here as well. And so as you see at the end of that clip, Veronique goes and looks in another window, and they're 2 Irish speakers. So they're from Rossmuck, which is up in Connemara, but they feel like Blowins, and they talk about that and what the term Blowin means to them. So they're a couple living in Gort and so on. And she goes around to other houses. I mean, it could have gone on forever, that one. It's a kind of an interesting way of doing things. And then I had this sort of setup of the 2 people across from each other as well. And this was kind of very much thought out cinematographically about how the 2 people are facing each other, and the kind of it's kind of a tableau style, I suppose, and each one kind of, so there's this kind of formal aesthetic that's kind of repeated in each one, where they're facing in profile to one another. So what else? I mean, maybe I'll come back to questions on the Blow-In and talk now a little bit about Town of Strangers. So after I made the Blow-In, it was quite successful in short film festivals. It was shown in the Berlinale. It won a couple of awards. It was nominated for a few. It was shown in Cork Film Festival 3 times in 3 different years. However, they managed that. Thank you, Cork. And it's also available through the library in Cork. It's through a European library, so it's had a lot of. It's kind of really gone out there, and it's been made accessible and free as well. And I can share a YouTube link for those people who might not get to the Glucksman Gallery if you're far from Cork. I do recommend obviously the full installation experience and to see the rest of the show. And Town of Strangers grew out of that, and it was kind of a very interesting way to work for me. To developing this feature, I really got to try out a lot of ideas with this short, The Blow-In. And I also used, for I presume there's probably a lot of artists and filmmakers here, but we're always saying, how did you get the funding? How did you get the funding? But I used a day of the shoot. So I shot The Blow-In, and so I had like a 5-day shoot, and I had enough money for a 6th day because I had everybody there. And I called for open auditions for Town of Strangers, and that was the beginning of this whole film that came about later, called Town of Strangers. So maybe I will just play the trailer of Town of Strangers and then talk about it. So give me just a moment there.
Will take place this Saturday in the town hall for a film to be made in Cork. We want you to come and tell us your stories, your dreams, your memories, any gossip, lies. Everyone in Cork of all nationalities, ages and gender are encouraged to come.
Yeah, first when I came to Ireland, my dream was to come here, stay for a year, and go home, have my pizza place. That's what I used to dream about. Buy my own house and live with my daughter. But things didn't happen this way.
Then you go a bit wild when you're living in the wilds.
At times I don't know where I come from. I came from the track, under the track. Now when I came to court, I'm scared. If I go outside or something, work around, I'm scared. That's it. I don't want to say nothing else.
What are you scared of?
Scared of people.
I met him in Tinder.
والله الحمد لله غير شكل
إن شاء الله يا ماما إن شاء الله.
So hopefully you get a little taste or a sense of the film there. So there are multiple protagonists who I mainly met through an auditioning process. So you're introduced to each person through their audition to be in the film, and an invitation that I made driving around in my van and putting up posters, and sometimes direct invite to people. And I asked people to come and tell me their dreams, lies, memories, and gossip. And I very deliberately chose these terms because dreams, lies, memories, and gossip are, for me, neither fact nor fiction, neither documentary nor fiction. But they're somehow, I feel like they're ways to access the psyche, or ways to access something inside of ourselves that I wanted to document. So I sometimes refer to Town of Strangers as a documentary of the imagination. which is a term borrowed from Joshua Oppenheimer, who made The Act of Killing and has been developing a whole method of filmmaking. And he was my PhD supervisor and I guess creative advisor, exec producer on Town of Strangers. So we would have long discussions around the kind of methods I was using and what it meant to do these auditions and the kind of performative nature of them. And he also looked at like lots of very long edits. God bless him. But because the editing process for this film was where it got made, really, because I had so much ideas and footage. And as art, I guess as an artist, it's interesting. I mean, maybe this can come up in the discussion after and people might resonate with this, but you know, process is such a big part of the work. And to make sort of a linear film that's shown in a single screen, and in this case it's been shown in festivals and a couple of cinemas, and now it's on, you rent it online. It's you know, it's a different format than maybe installation work and so on. And so getting this into a sort of an 82-minute shape that could still retain its kind of experimental nature, and also, but also sustain prolonged viewing, so that it wasn't like so too flat, if you like, or too horizontal in its structure, you know, was a real challenge, and something that, you know, myself and the editor metaphorically wrestled with for about a year, on and off. I mean, we weren't working constantly for a year, but we worked on it for a year, and I shot in between and brought things together. And she was kind of really amazing at bringing the kind of structure and picking out some of the themes that I had missed, because I had very specific themes in mind, which is also something interesting in terms of what you think you have rather than what's actually there. And so, you know, what I had kind of very consciously been thinking about was home, belonging, identity, migration, you know, all of these things. But what actually some of, and that they're very much in the film, but what the editor, Miriam Sturgala, really sort of picked out of what was there was a lot of these kind of interfamily relationships, and how much they actually resonated with the themes of home and belonging and identity, and how much our relationships with our parents or children actually affect that. And it really brought a kind of an emotional kind of universality to the film, I think, that was different to the more kind of you know, more sort of intellectual themes that I suppose I had in mind. God, we're at 1:30 already, but we did start late. Okay, so I'll leave it there for Town of Strangers and the Blow-In, and maybe just talk about another couple of projects that I've done recently and I'm working on, and then we can open it out to questions, and I'm happy to go into more detail on anything. So this show, as maybe you know, was supposed to go out, I think, over a year ago. And it was, I think it was May it was going to be launched, or April, I can't remember now, maybe Chris can remind us. But of course, with the lockdown, it got postponed, and then it got postponed again, and then and it's been on, I think, since the 11th of May, and it's only because I'm doing this lunchtime talk, it kind of clicked with me that, oh, the show must actually be on. You know, lockdown brought its own challenges for everybody, and I'm a single mom and I'm working, and so as an artist, single mom working, etc., you know, I had fierce FOMO for all these artists that all of a sudden seem to have loads of time to work on things. I had less time. I had very little time to begin with, and now I had less time. So that was that. But strangely, I had less time, but I actually had more headspace because some distractions were gone. So it took a little bit of adjustment, but I did start working on some things, and the Glucksman asked if artists that were in the show would like to share other things that they might be working on as part of their process. And I ended up, rather than just sharing something simple, I ended up like responding to that and making a whole new work in response to that, which was Coveted Dreams, which happened a little bit organically. You know, I had chats to friends and they were saying they had very vivid dreams, and dreams is a big thing in Town of Strangers as well. And I was, I'm a big fan of kind of Jungian psychology as well, even though I ain't no expert on it, but I'm quite fascinated by it. And I'm very interested in kind of, I suppose, dreams and the kind of collective unconscious, not just our kind of inner psychology, but what we might share through dreaming. And so I just put the word out through some of my kind of WhatsApp groups of friends and things, and said, you know, I'm collecting dreams now. And then I became a collector of dreams, and I asked people to send them to me just by audio and WhatsApp. And then connected with Town of Strangers, Irene Buckley, the Cork composer, really, really talented composer, who had done some music for my last film, Meet Your Children, and then I had funding from the Arts Council to make Town of Strangers, so I commissioned Irene to be the composer. But as the film, and she made amazing music for it, but as the film progressed, I ended up bringing in a lot of other music that I hadn't planned on because of how the characters kind of formed, I suppose. So Hamid, in the end, kind of, you know, I have a pop song, an Afghan pop song with a lot of his scenes. And I ended up kind of and then I have like with one of the Brazilian people, Josi. She has she did this contemporary dance in her evangelist church, and so I ended up getting the rights for that by Ludmilla Ferber. So a lot of the music then that Irene had composed, there wasn't really room for all of it because I had these kind of very specific, I suppose, pieces of music then for the characters. So I asked Irene if I could use some of the pieces that she had made that didn't go into Town of Strangers and kind of upcycle them, or whatever the word is, for this new project, Coveted Dreams. And so I made my first soundworks, which were the recordings from my friends mixed with some Irene's music. And I mean, I'm not a professional sound mixer or anything, so I mixed them myself on editing software Premiere, and Paul Rowland then did a final sound mix on them, which I was really, really happy with. And it really and it was something I was able to do late at night when Baba was in bed, and it was really fun for me to do something that I don't normally do that's not visual. Although I might argue that it is visual, and I would invite you all now maybe to listen to some of it and turn off your cameras for maybe 2 minutes, and we'll maybe do some listening and see those images that will form in our head. And so you can listen to all of these on the Glucksman website, or they're also on my own website, which I'll put up at the end. And there's 6 different pieces, or you can listen to them all in one go, and it's about 19 minutes to listen to them all in one go, or they're roughly about 3 minutes each, about the average pop song. Okay, so I'll stop the video here, and I'm going to play just the first one, which you'll hear one of the first dreams. So just a moment, please. And I just invite you to just, yeah, I suppose if you're listening, or, you know, sometimes for these talks you're doing something else, just to be present for these 2 minutes and really just listen without the visual.
My sleeping patterns are a bit disturbed at the moment. They're not normal, they're irregular and everything. Like recently, my dreams, I don't tend to remember them in the morning. Whereas like in the past, I would remember most of my dreams, not all, but most of my dreams. But what I know is that I would have these recurring dreams where I would be chased by people, then I would run. You know how difficult it is and scary it is to run in a dream. They would chase me, and sometimes it would be like I'm running on air. I run, being scared, with my heart beating and my chest, like, you know, going gum, 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 gum. And in my mind, I just want to run to where they won't catch up with me. They are close behind me. The running becomes very difficult, as it always does in a dream. Like I'm running on air, or I'm running in the clouds with the wind pushing against me, slowing me down. become very apprehensive. But each and every time they don't catch me, I manage to get away from them. Then I wake up in the morning all sweaty, still with my heart thumping loudly against my chest. Chase me. Chase me. And sometimes it should be like I'm running on air, running on air, running on air. Chase me. Then I would run. You know how difficult it is and scary it is to run in a dream. Heart thumping loudly against my chest. Running on air, running on air, running on air, running on air.
Okay, so I mean, this was kind of a new thing, new way of working for me, and very collaborative, and very, in some ways, you know, my authorship is very light. I mean, it's Irene's music, it's other people's dreams. In some ways, it's I have the concept, I suppose, but it's not necessarily a piece of conceptual art. But you'd say maybe original concept by or something, and I did the technical stuff of putting it together. And the one you just heard by Jamulu, you know, is the one that I kind of did the most kind of experimentation with. You know, the other ones are a bit more straightforward in terms of the dream, but I sampled some of her voice. I found it very musical, and it I suppose working on that piece particularly reminded me of Steve Reich's music, and I got the great pleasure of working with him in the Living Music Festival years ago in Dublin. And he has a piece which maybe people know, if not, check it out, called It's Gonna Rain. So it's a sample of a man saying it's gonna rain, but it's like by repeating it, you really hear it as a musical piece, and you hear how we speak, how musical it is, and the tones that we use. So it's quite interesting to use the voice without necessarily singing, to use it musically and rhythmically. And so Jamulu's dream and her way of speaking, which is so velvety, really kind of lent itself to that. So I just kind of want to draw your attention to that, because that was something I made really, you know, very specific. I would never have made that. It was very specific to the COVID confinement. It was specific to the Glucksman Chris basically saying, you know, look, we can't do the exhibition, but you know, if you want to share something you're doing, we'll put it up on the website, and really sort of responding to that and really going with it. And you know, especially because I end up doing sort of very big projects sometimes, and working, you know, over long periods of time. It was something that also happened very quickly, and I kind of enjoyed that for its sake as well. I realized the time, so maybe we can open it up to questions. And I was going to show a little film that I made during lockdown as well, but basically I think we'll just go to questions and discussion. And if there's not much discussion, I can go and show it. But if there's, maybe it's nicer to have a chat, to keep it within the lunchtime time.
Thank you so much, Treasa. I think there will be a fair amount of discussion. I have loads of questions here as well. And, you know, pardon me, obviously would just love to have a big long chat about Iranian cinema, which I'm also a big fan of. But keeping within the confines, thanks so much for, I think, you know, talking through some of these projects and relating them back to the exhibition as well. And it's kind of really interesting for me to see some of the connections between Coveted Dreams, which I know you speak of as a little bit of an outlier within your practice, but even this idea of kind of talking about dreams, lies, memories, and gossip in terms of your filmmaking as well. I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you about is, and maybe elaborate on some of the points you made about the idea of ethno-fiction. And I guess this is particularly the kind of idea of this kind of anthropological conundrum in a way of like, you know, how do you record these kind of situations without acknowledging your presence, and what are the kind of measures that might kind of incorporate kind of the subjective into a medium which we might think of as being, you know, objective documentary, or what was once thought of in that way. And of course, you also mentioned about, you know, Joshua Oppenheimer and and his role as executive producer and also somebody you worked with. And I guess I'm roundabout, I'm kind of looking at this idea of, what are the kind of like ethical parameters around working in that way? And I'm just thinking about this because obviously, when The Act of Killing came out and when Look of Silence came out, this was kind of an issue of like, what kind of guidelines do you implement in terms of working in a documentary tradition, but also bringing in elements of kind of fiction, of kind of staging, of kind of theatricality. And I wonder if that's something you could maybe talk on a little bit.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of thinking and writing because I concurrently with Town of Strangers, I was doing a PhD. So it's a PhD by practice. So the practice, the Blow-In and Town of Strangers are what I'm kind of writing from. I'm not always writing about them because I end up writing about a lot of people's work, including some Iranian filmmakers. Chris, if you ever want to read my PhD, you'll need another lockdown for that, I think. Yeah, so there's a lot to say here, but I suppose the sort of the so I've done a lot of research into this and talking about this. I've been involved in documentary for quite a long time. I made my first documentary actually in Cork, Mosquito Bites, and but I ran a documentary festival in London, and then I also it was mainly around the idea of documentary, but kind of really starting from documentary because into kind of experimental film that uses, we'll say, observational or documentary material, and also hybrid forms in Iranian cinema, like I said as well. So the ethics, I guess, part of it, of working with people, whatever you're making, whether it be a straight fiction or a straight documentary or all these stuff in between, I guess the main ethics are around consent, informed consent. So it's about sort of being transparent about how things are being used and including people in the process. So even though I had a collaborative process, that wasn't like horizontal. I was very clear that I was the author of the work, and I was very clear that I would have the final say in the edit. But I was also inviting a lot of collaboration, the kind of process before that. And for some people, even though I didn't have to, I did show them the edit, people that I felt might have been particularly vulnerable, and to see if they were okay with that. So there's kind of the consent and kind of the relationships you have, and then your kind of inner your own framework. But I think it's good to be aware of that. You don't always have to share it with everybody, but I would encourage people to be aware of that and to make yourself aware of that, because it can get very blurry for sure. And I guess, I suppose just to make a distinction between myself and Joshua Oppenheimer, our work is very, very different. I mean, the stuff that he was making is much more dangerous, we'll say, I suppose, in some ways. And he's working with perpetrators of crimes and so on. I think in my work, it's quite different. I'm very much kind of operating, from a more benign place, I suppose. But still, I'm also, I still want to work with people on a very real level, and real is such a contested term in documentary. I mean real in a very kind of popular way of the word. I want us to affect one another. I want us working together to mean something, to affect us, to change us. I don't want to make a Benetton ad about how we're all different colors and we're all going to get on well together. I want to actually look at difficulties, challenges, vulnerabilities, fragilities, real emotions that we have, and to do that in the most ethical, kindest way, but also not being afraid to go there, as long as I'm with the person saying, are you okay to do this, are you okay to do that, and so on, and during the filming, before the filming, after the filming as well, and so on. So there's, I guess, an informed consent process, but also a kind of like, if you're gonna, I would like to work with you, but this is this, I suppose now as I go forward, these films they're only recently made, and I think I've been forming this kind of new language or new way of working over the last 3 or 4 years. So I guess now I'll have works to refer people to, because my works kind of prior to this period were more kind of I suppose, activist type documentary, or else kind of very experimental video work as an artist. Whereas I think I've kind of come into my own as a kind of film artist / director, and that with these works, I feel like I'm kind of onto something. And that was the big value of doing a PhD, even though at times I wanted to dump it and it was a pain in the ass. It was a huge value to really, because it really made me interrogate my own work and what I was doing and why I was doing it.
Wonderful. I wanted to also ask you a little bit about, I guess, Gort, which I'm sorry to say I wasn't even aware of a lot of this, that it has this kind of particular reverence, I guess, to migration and, you know, this kind of influx of Brazilian migrants. I did a little fact digging, of course, in preparation, and found that at one point in 2009, Brazilians represented 1/3 of the population of the town. And of course, it was christened Little Brazil as well. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your experience in relation to the townspeople making this film, and what kind of sense you got of the non-blow-ins, how they felt about the shifting demographics of a pretty small place.
In general, people were very welcoming. I think people felt that, you know, it brought a bit of life to a very small kind of, you know, town that was once kind of a bustling market town. And, you know, a lot of it was very quiet. And I think but the Brazilians first came because there was a need for labor in the meat factories. So people were glad to have that filled. It was during the Celtic Tiger years when, you know, those kind of jobs, Irish people didn't want to do them. So there was no competition, I suppose, for jobs in that sense. It wasn't like, oh, they're coming and taking our jobs. You know, it was very much like there was loads of construction going on, if people remember. And so there was, you know, one thing that was, you know, quite strange to see, and there's a little clip of it in Town of Strangers. It still happens, but in much smaller numbers, is people would line up in the square in Gort every morning from around 8 a.m. for work, and then locals would come and drive up and basically pick up people to come out and work on their construction project, farm, or whatever it was. And so a lot of those jobs went when austerity hit and the bust happened. And so a lot of Brazilians moved away. And so when I made the film, there's a lot of second generation Brazilians and more settled Brazilians there. There was still some new Brazilians coming, but not the same movement that maybe like 10 or 15 years ago. You know, the 1/3 statistic, it was very hard to count. So many of them would have been undocumented and also would have been coming and going. So they would have like come there, but maybe gone to other parts of Ireland or Europe or come back again. So they might be coming multiple times, or, you know, or coming for a shorter time. So it was, you know, it's difficult to count, obviously, undocumented people. So, you know, those statistics are guesswork. I don't know how they get them.
I suppose it makes a good headline, doesn't it, as well?
Yes, yeah, but where there's a hell of a lot.
Yeah. I think that's also when I moved over as well. So I also wanted to ask you about, and one thing you've mentioned about in relation to the blow-in is its kind of resonance with kind of, you know, ideas around kind of borders and nationalism, populist, and specifically kind of right-wing ideology. So it's kind of nice to hear a positive take on that, I think, as well. But of course, it was a film also made in 2016, the year of Trump and Brexit. And did you see in making these films, did you get a sense of these trends advancing internationally, and did that have an impact on the shaping of the film as well?
Sorry, the trends of right-wing ideology and Brexit and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, definitely. And yes, hugely. And I made these films very much in counter to them, I suppose. But I suppose what's different about the older Treasa would have made films that might have been more talking heads and kind of more kind of street protest style. And there is a value to them. I don't disown them or anything, but I think I wanted to make something that was going to capture something around kind of more emotional rather than intellectual understanding, so that you sort of feel with so you feel with the person rather than pity them or say, oh, or tut, isn't that terrible, or whatever. So I was trying to find a way of working with the other, and I guess this goes back to the ethics thing, that's kind of shared. And so and also go back to Ethno-Fiction and Jean Rouch. So he called it Anthropology partagée, so shared anthropology. So it's where the anthropologist shares their process with the person, and they come into the work. So it's not about just observing. It's not about flying the wall. It's flying the soup, if you like. So yeah, yeah, big time. Also, as I said, I was coming in the period when I made Town of Strangers and The Blow-In. I was going back and forth to Greece all the time to work in solidarity camps in refugee camps, and so I was quite interested in the aftermath, I suppose, of that as well, coming back to Ireland. And I very deliberately cast, in The Blow-In there, you see that there's like, two Irish speakers from Rossmuck who consider themselves as blow-ins, and also in Town of Strangers, you have Chloe, a traveller girl who's obviously very indigenous to Ireland, and her family are very local, go back generations. You have like Rowan, who's like second generation English, and so you have like, one of the biggest migrants into Ireland is actually English people, and we often forget that because they're white. And Americans second probably as well. I don't know that statistic exactly. I know the English one for sure is the highest. And so, this idea of what a migrant is, or what a person moving around is. And I kind of wanted the themes, obviously migration is a theme, if you like, but I really wanted it to be about like, what does it mean to belong? What does home mean? What does it mean when you feel like you belong to two different cultures? And that's not necessarily about national cultures. It could be various different kinds of kind of ethnicity, or sexuality, or all sorts of cultures where you feel like, I belong to these two pieces, but what does that mean for me, and how you reconcile those, and how society judges or accepts or acknowledges those, I think has a big impact, and how you yourself accept and acknowledge yourself.
And I had one more question about The Blow-In, just because I'm just curious, I guess, but about the character of Veronique, this who feels like a stranger, even when she was in France, felt like a stranger. And of course, you see her peering in through people's windows and stuff. And I just wonder, like, as a filmmaker, do you feel kind of an identification with her character, as this kind of recorder of these different individuals and stuff? And did you feel that there was something in her actions in the film that maybe felt like a commentary on your own position as a filmmaker who's integrating themselves within this community, and yet has this distance, has this kind of sense of dislocation from it as well?
That's very astute of you, because yes, but I didn't know it at the time, but I realized that after making it. And I actually wrote about that Veronique, I think I called her a proxy for me, but I didn't, while I was making it, I don't think I was that conscious of it. And maybe I shouldn't have been. And I think that's something interesting about, I guess, filmmaking and creativity and art making. If you're too conscious about all of these things, can ruin it, because it becomes a bit paint by numbers. But I think very much so. Yeah. And I guess in some ways, I suppose it was also, I also realized I was probably more, most like her in some ways, even in terms of relative privilege, as well, age, gender, etc. A little bit neurotic. We have that in common as well, in the best sense of that term. So yeah, there was, we really hit it off, and so there was a little doppelganger maybe going on. So yeah, in some ways, and she is, the one that's peering in the windows. I'm obviously peering in the windows as a documentary maker as well,
looking over your shoulder. I have a couple of questions here as well, can you talk about working between different media? And do you employ similar artistic strategies in working across different disciplines? And of course, you alluded to this as well, that I mentioned at the outset, you come from the sculptural background, but you've worked as a curator, a writer, an activist, a lecturer. Do you kind of see those different, I guess what we're seeing here is, do you see them as kind of stemming from the same areas of interest, the same kind of place, the same kind of research backgrounds?
More and more, yes. Not always, and sometimes it's nice just to do something different in another guise. I do a lot less curating than I used to before. But I love curating because I love showing other people's work, and it's partly, it's a really creative thing to do, to be able to show other people's work and to talk about other people's work, and especially when the themes are things. So the themes and the things I would be interested in would be following my own interests, I suppose, a lot of the time. And so that's a very creative process for me. And I'm very, I suppose I like people. I like, as a documentary maker, but also as a curator, etc. I really enjoy interacting with people. Lockdown's been so hard. But like I really, really, I think I've only become conscious of that maybe in through lockdown and being serious about it, because, I have friends who are introverts that are kind of happy out really. And a lot of artists are naturally introverts, I suppose. But I think I'm an extrovert. I enjoy sharing my work and talking about it and sharing other people's work. And I really, I guess one of the things that's come through from be it activism to writing to all of my work is, I guess, collective authorship. So I guess often in the art world, we're, besides a kind of brief moment in the 70s, we're very obsessed with the kind of lone genius, I suppose. And I'm not really into that. I'd be more of the idea that genius is some kind of spirit that exists that we have the privilege sometimes of accessing, rather than we are a genius, or one can be a genius, which goes back to the kind of Greek idea of genius. Sorry, I'm off on one now. What was I saying?
Just saying, I mean, obviously kind of an issue.
How did they connect up?
And you kind of mentioned this before. What are you working on now? So you have had this kind of period, and we started late, so I mean, it's certainly
okay. If you need to go back to work, don't bother. And will people here get to chat, or have they any questions? Or
I had a couple come in, so I read them through.
Right. Sorry, what was the question again?
And what are you working on now?
Oh yeah, I'm working on a few things. So I just finished a chapter actually for a book called Artifact: The Poetics of Documentary. So I've written a chapter about my process of making Town of Strangers that's adapted for my PhD, but I changed things quite a lot. So I spent a lot of time working on that. And I'm trying to kind of, I guess, see a lot of my stuff more as connected as well. And so rather than saying, oh, that's taking me away from my creative work, I'm trying to see that as part of my creative work, writing a chapter for a book. I've been shortlisted for 2 film projects here in Limerick, where I live. So they're called Engine. So there's Engine Drama Shorts and Engine Docs. And so the film that so again, there's connections everywhere, but the film that I started to make, I didn't talk too much about it, but I had this fiction script about a meat factory that I came to Cork with. I've kind of made that into a fictional dramatic short, and that's in development at the moment with Engine. And then I've also just been shortlisted to make a short documentary with them about the comedy duo The Wild Geese, which are Laura Lavelle and Breda Larkin, who are like a burlesque dancer and a musician. And so I'm really excited about doing that, which is partly I'm kind of attracted to that because sometimes my work gets a bit serious. So I'm like, I'm going to do a fun thing. But of course, they want to make a film about grief. But about how they can laugh about grief. And then also I just got an Arts Council bursary to develop a new project, which I'm just trying to find the time to get properly started on. But it's basically looking at how I can use documentary material to be to perform as something else. So it's almost like I'm casting documentary archive to perform as science fiction. How I'm going to do that is part why I got the bursary. So I'm basically going to go through a kind of a development research period over the next year and see how that might work. But I'm really excited about getting into that as well.
Well, excited to hear it from our side as well. And thanks so much for the conversation today and for the discussion. Apologies to audience members who had some technical difficulties. We had a bit of hiccups here getting things set up, but as always, we will have this live on YouTube, and I'll be able to send out links to anyone who had any kind of struggles with the setup today. It was very much on our end, I believe. But we'll be back in a few weeks for the next in our series with the talk with Amanda Rice. But for now, let me just say a very big thank you, and great to see you again to Treasa O'Brien.
Oh, thank you. Just to let you know that the Town of Strangers is available to rent from the IFI at the moment, and there's a bonus Q&A on there as well. Maybe I'll just put the link up in the chat, shall I?
So that's www.ifihome.ie/film/town-of-strangers/ and check it out. Terrific. Thank you very much, Treasa.
Okay, bye-bye.